today. We are in the third part of a series called All right, pretty good. Got a little extra energy because it's Mother's Day. I like that. So what we're doing is really talking about relationships. And we're using the language of romantic relationships. But what's been amazing to me is over the past several weeks, I've probably had just as many conversations that really had more to do with like friendships or even parent and child or adult children relationships with their parents, and how this whole dynamic of desires and expectations, like what that has to say about those relationships as well. And so it's been kind of cool to see how these principles really do apply to other relationships. But like I said, we are going to be using the language of romantic relationships. So if you're not in a relationship right now, you might have to do some translating as we move forward in the series. So if this is your first week with us, I'll bring you up to speed a little bit, and I'll try to do it fast. My wife told me last night, nobody likes a long recap. So we'll try to move forward quickly. Basically, what we're talking about is this idea of a good relationship, like the relationship that people dream of being in. What's working in that relationship? Like when a relationship is working, why is it working? Because if you don't know why something's working, you won't know how to fix it when it breaks. So what is it? And what we said was that really what's happening in a relationship that's working is that it's running on desire. What we're doing is all out of desire. Desire for you, your desire for me. And what happens, the way this starts is like early on in life, at some point, we develop this picture of what we want in someone, somewhere, someday. It's this ideal. These are our desires, and they could be things that were passed down to us from our parents that we saw, admired, and want for ourselves. They could be things we saw in our parents that we want to avoid. They could be things that we saw, on the Disney Channel or in movies or whatever it is. It's not right or wrong. It's just things that we want. And so we have this box, right? And maybe for you, it's like, well, one day I want to find someone I could travel the world with, right? And one day someone somewhere out there will take me all over the world. Or one day I want to find someone that I can start a family with. Right? We'll have lots and lots of kids and it's going to be great. Or one day I want to have a house with someone and I want to find someone who's going to help me clean the house, right? Or someone who's going to clean the house for me, or someone who's going to hire a cleaning service so I don't have to clean anymore. Or someone who's going to cook for me, like wouldn't that be great? Or someone who's going to respect my, alone time out on the golf course, or someone who's going to let me really enjoy my car. We've got all these hopes, these dreams, these wishes, these desires, right? And so what do? We take these desires and we take them out on the road. And we go to school, we go to college, we go to work, wherever it is, and we start looking for a match, right? And so maybe you find someone, you're like, okay, no, they're not it. Then you think you find someone and they tell you no, sorry, you're not it, right? And then you find someone and it's a match. And there's this hope that you've got what I want, right? And when someone starts doing something that you desire, it's amazing. It's not expected, but it's desires. And now you're fulfilling my desires. And now I start doing what you want, and I'm fulfilling your desires. And it's this cycle of desire. And that's like the honeymoon phase. That's where a relationship is really great. And if we can keep these desires, it's a really good place to be in. Right? But often what happens is that at some point in the relationship, these desires shift from being something I want in someone out there to what I expect from you. Our desires go from desires to expectations. And sometimes this is instantaneous. Sometimes it's over time. But it goes from, I'd love to one day travel with someone, see the world, to when are we going on vacation? All my friends have already. When are we finally gonna go get to see the world? It goes from, maybe one day someone will help me clean the house to, do I really have to come home to a dirty house again? Right? An expectation is simply something you're supposed to do. And all the things that happen with desires, like all the feelings that come from a desire being fulfilled, the feelings of gratitude, of appreciation, they don't come with expectations. Because when you do what you're expected to do, you're simply doing what you were supposed to do. You met the requirement. And so what we said with expectations is an expectation is either met or there's debt, right? You either didn't lose or now there's a deficit. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. And so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong to have desires, but feelings don't follow desires. If you have a mortgage, that's a relationship you're highly invested in. Someone has given you a lot and you're giving something in return. But I bet you're not in love with your mortgage company, right? Because it's a transactional, contractual agreement with expectations. With a desire, when a desire is not fulfilled, I'm sad, right? But when an expectation is not met, I'm mad. And there's this feeling like you owe me. You didn't hold up your end of the deal. And there's really very little room for intimacy in a relationship that has become all about expectations. And so, the question was, well, what do we do? Where's the guidance? Where's the way out? And ironically, or interestingly, we could say, it comes from Jesus. Maybe not surprisingly, because we look to him for a lot of things, right? But he was never married. And this principle that he gives us really has the ability to transform our relationships, inside and outside of relationships. He says, as I have loved you, so you love one another. You wanna know what love looks like? Follow my lead. Look at what I did and do that. The love you have experienced from me. Take that and show that to other people. And a huge part of that was canceling debt, right? For us, we believe that what Jesus did on the cross when he gave his life for us, he was canceling our debt. He was taking everything that we've ever done wrong, as if there was a record of it. And Paul, who writes a letter to a church in one of the cities in the ancient world, says that it's as if he took the record of our debt and nailed it to the cross, done, over. And the idea is well, what if we did that with one another? What if we refused to carry debt? In other words, what if we dropped our expectations? In fact, we can say that what really happy couples have come to understand, they live as if they give everything and they expect nothing. They refuse to carry a record of debt. And so it doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, we had to clarify this after week 1. It doesn't mean they don't have desires. They do have desires, and they should communicate that, and they should voice that, and they should make it clear, and you should talk about it. But if it stays a desire, then when you get what you want, you're appreciative. If it becomes an expectation of you finally doing what I expected you to do all along, well, when you finally do it, I'm appeased, right? And so on the outside, often it doesn't look very different, but on the inside, it is radically different. And then last week, in week 1, we talked about trying to drop the expectations, but last week we really focused on what it looks like to give everything. And we looked at this verse that nobody really likes. It says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Which is not exciting, But the idea of submission is to set aside what you want and live for the desires of the other, completely. Now that sounds crazy, but if you think about it, how beautiful is a relationship where two people are completely invested in the other? Giving, not 50-50 compromise, I give you this, you give me that, and we just don't get in the way of my pursuit of happiness, right? It's, I'm all in this for you, and you're all in that for, that's what we really want. And we do it out of reverence, not fear reverence, but in response to everything that Jesus has done for us. That's the source. It's as if that as I have loved you, you take that love you feel from me, and instead of trying to give it back to me, you go show that to other people. Show it to other people. So much for a short recap, right? Here's the question. Maybe you've been here, right? Maybe you've been in this place in your relationship. You ever really, really set aside your desires and be I'm doing it for her, You got this big idea, or him, right? You put all your ducks in a row, and you're preparing, and you're excited, and it's like you're gonna hit it out of the park, right? But you swing and you just whiff, right? It's a swing, and I gave it everything I had, but nothing. And here I gave up everything I wanted, and you're not even happy, right? A couple of years ago, I did this. I've done it a few times since then as well, but there's one that sticks out specifically. May is the beginning of like a really big season for my relationship. We have Mother's Day, big deal today, Mother's Day. Then a little while after that, we have my wife's birthday, Allie's birthday. Then a little while after that, we have our anniversary. So it's like boom, 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 3 big things, like no expectations, but a lot of desires, you don't wanna like mess this up, right? So one year I'm like, oh, this is gonna be good. I got an idea. I'm gonna take all 3 big days and I'm gonna combine them into one. And I really thought this was a great idea. Now, life tip, okay? If you're not there yet, if you're not in a relationship, don't do this. But if you do, like that gift, whatever you're gonna deliver on, it better be like the moon, right? Like something great. Well, I didn't get the moon, I got a vacuum. All right, it was a nice vacuum, it was a Roomba, it was one of those that drives itself. And I'm thinking, this is great. I'm a real practical guy. I'm like, she's at that time, she's taking care of 2 kids. She's staying at home. Like, how great would it be if she never had to think about vacuuming the house? It's gonna be fantastic. So I'm sitting there, on Mother's Day morning with a dopey smile on my face, like thinking I'm gonna save the day, and she opens it and I just see the look on her face, and she really tried to hide her true emotions, but I'm like, oh, this was a big, big mistake. And then it started to make sense, but it was a big swing and a miss. Nobody really got what they wanted. I have a friend who gave his wife a scale, all right? I didn't do that, yeah. Anyway, there are times, right, and maybe you've been here, it's frustrating, where you really do try and it's like, we're not on the same page. We're not even reading the same book, It's as if we're speaking a different language. And in the passage that we started last week, where Paul says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, he actually goes into like more detail when it comes to each side of the relationship. And just taking a closer look at this can really shed a lot of light on the language that we're speaking, on the needs of one another. And so here's what he says. You're gonna like it. All right, ready? So he says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Then he goes, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands. And at first it's like, ooh, right? Nobody really likes that. And then there's this question like, okay, well, what are the stipulations here? Like, at least give me some limits. Let's be reasonable here, right? And he says, okay, here, as you do to the Lord. Happy Mother's Day. Yeah. So here's the idea, right? At that time, the women who would have been hearing this, because they didn't read it, they didn't have a Bible like we do, this would have been read aloud to a group. The women who would hear this, like women loved Jesus. There were groups of women that followed Jesus everywhere. At that time, women, unfortunately, like tragically, but probably not surprisingly, women had no value. They weren't allowed to testify in a court. They were seen as property. Like a man could just write off his wife and send her out. And he could just do that if he wanted to. They weren't treated with respect. And yet time and time again, Jesus does some pretty radical countercultural things to elevate the status of women. And so women liked him. Like women saw him as someone who was in their corner, someone who was worth submitting to, someone who is worth following. And so what Paul is saying here is like, wives, submit to your husband. All right, listen, he's probably not gonna be worth submitting to all the time, right? He's not always gonna be worth following, but do it as if you were doing it for Jesus. And this would have been countercultural. Now pause for a second. This verse has been used like all over for centuries and really abused, often by men. Probably in most cases by men, as a weapon to make women feel like men can just boss them around and just like have to listen to everything that they say, and then they point to, to the Bible and say, well, look, God says so, right? And if that ever happens to you or you ever hear of that, all you have to do is rewind one verse where it says, submit to one another. In other words, like, wives, submit to your husbands, but also husbands, submit to your wives. It's mutual submission here. So it's like, well, what's the deal? Didn't we just cover that? Well, why the redundance? Hold that thought. He goes on then. He says, husbands. Now pause here, husbands. What Paul is writing is something called a household code. This was something that was common in that culture. A household code, like Romans had a household code, code. They had a home code, all right? And Greeks had a code for their home. Jews had a code for their home. And it was like everybody in the home and what they were supposed to do. Men, husbands, were never mentioned in the household code because they were seen as the king who reigned supreme. And so no one would dare tell a man how to run his home. And so they're sitting and they're listening to him read. And it's like, wives, submit your husband. And all the men are probably like, uh-huh. And then he goes, husbands. And right away, everyone would, what do you mean? We're not supposed to be part of this? And he goes on. And again, this is Paul following the footsteps of Jesus, elevating the value of women. And his section on like how the men should live and give themselves for their wives, it's longer even than what he says to the women. He says, husbands, love your wives. Okay, how much? Like, give me some boundaries. Where are the, stipulations and the fine print terms and conditions? Love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Gave himself. Love in such a way that communicates that they are worth everything. Now, like, pause for a second here. Okay, husbands, love as Jesus has loved. Like, didn't we just cover that? Right? Didn't Jesus say, as I have loved you, so you love one another? Like, there it is again. It's also the wife's job to love the husband. So why does he have to point out that the husband should love the wife? And then there's this section, he unpacks this even more, and at the end there's this concluding section, and he says, each of you, speaking to the husbands, he says, each of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This is the same language, same type of language used when talking about submission. And so, like, again, rewind, just like you got to see this, rewind. It's what we have here is the wives being told to submit, and yet everyone is supposed to submit, right? We have the word submit to one another. Then we have the husbands being told to love, and yet everyone is told to love one another. So what's the deal? A lot of us, and this is common, especially in this area, a lot of us have this view of God as if he's this power-hungry, rule-giving dictator, just like loves to be in charge and is just waiting to drop the hammer and punish everybody, And so we read that tone, whether we realize it or not, into this text. And so often we read this and we're like, well, this is what the wife has to do, and this is what the husband has to do, and we just like see it as orders, right? But if we just back up and think, okay, what if this is coming from a father who loves us and genuinely wants what's best for us? Would we hear it differently? Like, imagine you're a parent and you just had children, and I said, parents, feed your kids. Would you look at me like, you just want to tell me what to do, right? Or maybe you would draw the conclusion that kids need food. Right? Or if I said to you, oh, you own a car? You own a vehicle? Well, car owners, you got to change your oil. Like, would you look at me like I was some power-hungry, like rule-giving, authoritarian force, right? Or would you be like, well, like if he cares, maybe My car needs an oil change. In other words, what I'm saying here is, what if, like as he's talking about submission, submit to one another, meeting the needs and the desires of one another, what if he's saying less about what she has to do and more about what he needs most? What if he's saying less about what his role is and more about what she needs from him? And you might totally disagree with me, right? Like maybe you think this is too general or too traditional or whatever, but what's interesting is that according to like the research, what tends to be true of the majority is that men often need and thrive on respect more than they need and thrive on love. And women often need to feel loved and cared, loved and treasured, valued more than they need to feel respect. Not to say they don't need respect, but it tends to, like, they tend to thrive on one more than another. There was a study done of thousands of people, and in conflict, they were asked, a bunch of men were asked, when you're in conflict, what stings? Like, what hurts? What's bothering you about that conflict? And 83% of the men said that they felt, in conflict, they felt disrespected. In the same study, under the same circumstances, women were asked how they felt, what stung about the conflict that they were going through. And they said 72% of them said they felt unloved. And so again, like maybe this is too general, maybe you feel like I'm stereotyping, right? But according to like what tends to be true of the majority, men need respect in a way that women don't, or thrive on respect in a way that women don't. And women tend to thrive on love in a way that men don't. It doesn't mean men don't need to feel loved. And so, even just understanding this, or even just, again, I know there's gonna be some pushback from this, but even if you just take the time to really unpack this and talk about it, it can help you and your significant other start to feel like maybe you're speaking the same language. So what this means is that for him, if this is true, for him, like all of his desires tend to be wrapped around this idea of respect. Respect. Now, respect can be one of those ambiguous, like kind of hard to describe what really is respect and disrespect, and what does that look like? Like it can be kind of hard. So to try and make it concrete, and again, there's limitations to this definition, but to be respected is to feel adequate. It's to feel capable. It's to feel strong. It's to feel trusted in. It's to feel leaned on. It's to feel like you are worth following. It's to feel like you cut the mustard, you get the job done. If you want someone to feel like you respect them, you can communicate to them. And again, there are limitations to this, but you're communicating to them, you've got this. You've got this. I'm behind you. I'm in this with you. Like, I'm not sitting there just like questioning your ability, like, I don't know, you may, but it's this idea that like you are worth following. Worth following. You can be trusted, leaned on, looked to. When I was younger, like real young, my great aunt used to watch me every day, and she had a pool in her backyard, and I would wear these like swimmies, and we played this game, and I would just be like, hey, can you just go in the corner of the pool, just pretend to drown? And she'd be like, okay, whatever, help, but I would like want to go in and get her. Even as a little kid, I wanted her to look to me and make me feel like I was capable of stepping in and doing something. And then I grow up a little bit and I'm playing in front of my house. Like I was a basketball guy. And so I'd be in front of my house in the street. There's nobody else around. It's just me and the basketball hoop. But no, in my mind, I'm like in Madison Square Garden and the Knicks are in the NBA Finals, which is how you know it's a dream. But I'm like sitting, and I'm counting down the seconds, and the coach is telling me, you're getting the ball. We only got 5 seconds and you got this, right? And so I got the ball, we're counting down from 5 and I'm shooting every time at the buzzer. And every time it either goes in or I got fouled and we got to run the play again, right? But there's this feeling, this desire to be looked to be counted on. Just recently, I was with my family in Florida, and we were walking on a dock, and I had my kids with me, and I'm looking around. There's some trees hanging over this dock. We're going through this marsh, and I see like baby alligators. And the thing about baby alligators is that they come from mommy alligators, you know? And so I start getting a little uncomfortable, and right away, I'm like, all right, what do you do? Alligator comes up on the dock, what do you do? You know, and I'm thinking of all these scenarios. I'm gonna take care of my family. Like, all right, you gotta throw the kids up in the trees, because alligators can't climb trees. You know, and I like talked about this, and my wife, I mentioned it to Allie, she's like, why are you thinking about this? But it's just, there's something about like this desire to be looked to. If you want to like cut someone who needs respect down, you communicate, and English teachers, brace yourself, you don't got this. Make him feel weak. Make him feel small, make him feel inadequate, question his judgment, like make him look like he's not worth, he's a joke. He doesn't got this. He's not worth it. His biggest fear is that, or one of his biggest fears, if this is true of him, is that he'll be seen for who he really is and found to be inadequate, not enough. He's not good enough for you. Doesn't cut the mustard. Not worth getting behind. And so while his desires are like wrapped in this idea of respect, often what tends to be true of the majority is that her desires are wrapped in this idea of love. Of love. Now, it's a little scary talking about women from a platform because I'm not one, you know? So I feel like I don't got this. But the way that it was explained to me, because love too can be a really abstract thing. The best way that it was explained to me is actually with the words of Paul. He says, love as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Like love in such a way that communicates, you are worth everything. Or if for respect, we'd say, you've got this. For love, we could say, you're worth it. You're worth my time. You're worth my energy. You're worth me planning our date to the restaurant, even though we both know we're gonna end up going to the restaurant that we go to every single time we go out, but I'll go out of my way and I'll plan and I'll make the reservation just so you know that I'm worth it. If you want to make a woman, like someone who needs love, not feel love, you communicate the exact opposite. You're not worth it. You're not worth my attention. You're not worth me going out of the way. You're not worth the time, the conversation, the eye contact. I'm doing something and I can't be distracted, and you're not worth me picking up my head and looking at you. You're not worth it. I asked my wife to describe this for me, like, can you give me some kind of picture or whatever? And she's like, okay. And again, there are limitations to this, but she's like, if you've ever seen the movie Titanic, you know, there's this scene at the end where Rose, I don't know, I think she's in heaven, I don't remember, but she's like glowing, and she's walking down this staircase, and immediately everyone stops and looks at her. Like she's captivating. She is worth the attention of everyone in the room. Valuable, treasured. Like you'd give everything for her. That's the picture. And so much of it is about how what you do communicates, not the result. Like a lot of guys are fixers, right? We like to fix problems. I'm learning that's like not the thing. You know, just 2 nights ago, we were getting ready to go to bed, and Allie was like, oh, shoot, I forgot my phone charger. And I was like, okay, no problem. Here, I've got one. And I gave it to her. She's like, oh, that's so nice. You know, you're going to give me your phone charger? I'm like, well, you know, I've got a bunch. And then she's like, actually, I don't need it. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, I'm not going out tomorrow, like until later, and so I could just charge my phone later on. It's not really a big deal. And I'm like, yeah, but you could also charge it right now. And she's like, listen, you won already. You made me feel like you care about me by offering. It doesn't matter what actually happens. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm in this to like get the job done, because I actually care that your phone's gonna be charged tomorrow, and now you don't have to think about whether or not you play. But she's like, no, it's about like the process. It doesn't matter if we're going to the same restaurant that I would have picked anyway. The fact that you went out of your way to show me I was worth your time, your energy, your effort, like that's what it's all about. It communicates you're worth it. Like how Jesus gave everything for the church. Her fear, at least one of her fears, was that she'll be seen for who she is and found to be not worth it, not worth your time, not worth your energy, disposable. There's a doctor, a counselor, his name's Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. He wrote a whole book about this. He's got some interesting insights. But he said in his experience, what he's noticed, he called it the crazy cycle. He said he's noticed that people who need respect, when they feel disrespected, they often act without love. And people who need love, when they feel unloved, they tend to act without respect. And so it becomes this cycle of you don't mean much to me, and well, you don't got this. And it just goes on and on and on. And maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe that's how you feel. You know, maybe you're married and you feel like my wife doesn't respect me. And maybe, or you look at your husband and think, no, he doesn't think I'm worth it. Maybe you've been in that crazy cycle for a while. And so, interestingly enough, we go back to the words of Jesus, who said, as I have loved you, so you love one another. Like he is the initiator. What has to happen to break the cycle? Someone has to love without feeling respected. Or someone has to show respect without feeling loved. Someone has to break the cycle. And that's exactly what Jesus modeled for us. Like he loved people who wanted his life to end. He loved people who he knew like were going to abandon him, who were going to betray him. That's like our whole story. When we wanted nothing to do with him, he steps in and shows love to us. We love because he first loved us. And so again, it's his words, the words of a single guy who was never married, that help us to break the crazy cycle in marriage. And so here's what I'll leave you with. Maybe you totally disagree with everything I said. You think it's too general, and that's fine. At the very least, my hope for you is that this will start a conversation in your relationship, if you're in a relationship. Like maybe you talk about it on the way home or at dinner or when you have some time away from the kids, if you have kids. Say, is that true? Like, do you really need to feel respected? And do you feel respected? Do you really need to feel like you're worth it? And do I make you feel like you're worth it? Or are we stuck a little in the crazy cycle? Someone once told me, in your relationship, your voice is the loudest voice in their life. And so what are they hearing? Are they hearing, you got this? I'm behind you. You're worth it. I'd give everything for you. Or are we stuck in a crazy cycle? And so that's my challenge for you. Maybe today, you go home and you let your significant other know. Give them 3 things. Here are 3 things I respect about you. Here are 3 things that I love about you. And maybe if we break the cycle, we'll begin to understand, or we'll better understand, what a relationship looks like that is thriving on desire.